On a cold night in a small fjord village, a father named Halldor woke from a dream he feared. In the dream, his daughter stood on a shore he did not know. Her hand reached for him. Her voice carried no sound. When he woke, his heart hit hard in his chest. People in Viking times listened to dreams like this. They treated them as warnings or paths. Halldor packed dried fish, smoked fat, and barley cakes. He walked to the longship before sunrise. He told no one what he saw. He feared the dream held truth. The sea stood dark before him. He stepped inside the boat with a single thought. He promised his daughter he would reach her before danger reached her first. Halldor woke in the dark. His breath shook. His dream showed his daughter on a strange shore. She called for him without sound. Her eyes held fear he had never seen. He rose from his bed. He walked to the fire. He felt the dream press on him like weight. In Viking times, people trusted dreams when danger touched the mind. Halldor packed food for hard days. He stepped through the cold dawn. The longship waited at the water. He held the rail and felt the wood shake in the wind. He feared what waited beyond the horizon. He feared what waited for his daughter. He pushed the boat into the sea. Slow your breath before we follow him. Ease your shoulders. Settle into your seat. Let the room soften. If you have a warm drink, take a slow sip. Pull a blanket close. Let the light dim a little. Before we begin the full story, tell me where you watch from. I like knowing the place you sit while we travel through Viking history together. If you enjoy stories like this, you are welcome to like, comment, or subscribe in your own slow time. No rush. This story moves with calm steps. Halldor's journey grows from fear, memory, and duty. When you feel steady, we start with the dream that pushed him to the sea. Halldor stood in the doorway of his longhouse before dawn. The cold touched his face. Snow lay still across the village. The fire behind him burned low. He held his cloak tight. His breath rose in slow clouds. The dream still pressed on his mind. He saw his daughter on a strange shore. She looked older in the dream. Her voice made no sound. Her hand reached toward him. He woke with his heart tight. He stepped outside with steady steps. No one else walked the path. Smoke drifted from a few vents. Dogs slept near the fences. A raven called from the roof of a storehouse. Its cry broke the silence. Halldor walked toward the fjord. The sky held thin lines of pale light. Ice floated near the rocks. His longship rested on the water with slow movement. He touched the side of the boat. The wood felt cold. He watched the tide pull and return. He walked back toward the longhouse. Inside, his daughter slept. She curled under a thick blanket. Her hair spread across the fur mat. Halldor watched her for a long moment. He wanted to wake her and tell her what he saw. He stopped himself. He feared his voice might shape her mind with worry. He wanted her to rest. His sister Runa stirred near the fire. She rose and stepped toward him. She asked why he stood awake so early. Halldor said he dreamed of danger. Runa asked if the dream pointed toward the sea or toward the village. Halldor said it pointed toward a place he did not know. She asked if it showed his daughter. He nodded. Runa's eyes sharpened. She knew dreams shaped choices in Viking life. She said he should speak to the elder. Halldor stepped outside and walked toward Arnkel's longhouse. Arnkel was an old man with steady hands and slow breath. People sought him when dreams pressed fear on their hearts. His door stood half open. Halldor stepped inside. Arnkel sat near the fire with a cup of warm broth. His eyes lifted when Halldor entered. Arnkel asked him to sit. Halldor knelt near the fire. He told Arnkel about the dream. He told him about the shore. He told him about the silence of his daughter's voice. He told him about the fear that rose in his chest when he woke. Arnkel listened without interruption. The old man placed his hand on the wooden floor and closed his eyes. He spoke slow. He said dreams held truth when they came with fear and silence. He said the shore pointed toward a place Halldor had not touched yet. He said he should follow the dream before the next moon. Halldor said the sea stretched far. He said he did not know where to go. Arnkel said the dream would guide him when he reached open water. He said people in Viking times trusted dreams shaped by family ties. He said children often called to parents in dreams before danger reached them. Halldor felt heat rise in his chest. Arnkel asked what Halldor planned to take on the journey. Halldor said he would pack dried fish, smoked fat, barley cakes, and fresh water. He said he would carry his father's knife. Arnkel nodded. He said these foods held strength for long days at sea. He said dried fish kept the mind alert. He said smoked fat fed the limbs. He said barley cakes steadied breath on rough water. Halldor thanked him. Arnkel said he should speak with his daughter before he left. He said a child should hear truth from a steady voice. Halldor walked out of the longhouse. Snow fell in thin flakes. He felt the dream sit on his shoulders like weight. He walked back to his own longhouse. Runa waited near the fire. His daughter sat beside her, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Halldor knelt in front of the child. He told her he needed to travel across the sea. She asked why. He said he needed to follow a dream. Her brow tightened. She asked if she did something wrong. He lifted her chin. He said she did nothing wrong. He said he wanted to protect her. She nodded. Her eyes held trust. Runa prepared warm grain and handed a bowl to Halldor. He ate slow. His daughter leaned against him. Runa packed herbs in a small pouch and tied it to his belt. She said the herbs helped settle breath during storms. He thanked her. After the meal, Halldor stepped outside and walked toward the longship. Snow fell in soft lines. He dragged the boat closer to shore and checked each plank. He tightened a loose rope. He tested the oar locks. His breath moved in steady rhythm. The cold air bit his skin, but he welcomed it. It kept his mind clear. Two men from the village approached. One held a fishing net. The other carried a basket. They asked Halldor where he planned to go. He said he followed a dream. They nodded with understanding. One man said his father once traveled far after a dream of his brother. He said dreams shaped direction when danger touched family. The other man handed Halldor a small bundle of smoked meat. He said the sea required strength. Halldor accepted the gift. Halldor placed food inside the longship. He arranged dried fish in a small crate. He set smoked fat near his water skins. He slid barley cakes into a leather pouch. He placed his father's knife near the seat. He felt the shape of the handle under his palm. It grounded him. He pushed the longship deeper into the water until it floated on the tide. He climbed in and sat at the rowing bench. He gripped the oars. He looked back toward the village. His daughter stood beside Runa at the shore. She raised her hand. Snow drifted around her. Halldor lifted his hand in return. The boy from a nearby longhouse stood beside them and watched with wide eyes. Halldor rode into deeper water. His breath stayed steady. Snow fell behind him. The fjord opened. Mountains stood tall on each side. The longship moved in slow rhythm. Water splashed against the hull. Halldor felt each pull in his shoulders. He rowed until he reached open water where the fjord widened. The sea stretched ahead in a gray line. Ice drifted near the surface. A cold wind touched his face. Haldor steadied his breath. He stopped rowing for a moment and sat still. He closed his eyes. He waited for the dream's direction to rise in his thoughts. The shore from the dream returned to him. He saw the strange rocks. He saw the line of trees behind the girl. He saw distant cliffs. He felt pulled toward the east. He opened his eyes and turned the longship. The bow pointed toward the rising sun. He rowed in long, smooth strokes. Sea foam splashed along the sides. A gull followed for a short distance. Haldor felt the cold settle into his bones. He kept rowing. His thoughts moved to the dream again. He tried to recall every detail. He thought about the way his daughter's hand reached for him. He felt a tight pull in his chest. Hours passed. The village drifted out of sight. The sea widened. Waves rose higher. Haldor ate a small piece of dried fish and drank water. The salty taste stayed on his tongue. The wind pushed the longship in steady bursts. Haldor adjusted his course. Clouds gathered overhead. The sea darkened. Waves hit the hull harder. Haldor braced his legs. The longship creaked under the strain. He rowed with firm strokes. Spray hit his face. He wiped water from his eyes. The wind grew stronger, ate a strip of smoked fat, and held the oar handles tight. The fat warmed his limbs. His shoulders burned. He pushed through. He kept his eyes on the line of the horizon. He felt the pull of the dream guide him. The storm did not break. It stayed light but steady. Snow fell again. The sea looked wild. Haldor kept rowing. He knew men in his village faced worse. He knew the sea respected steady movement. He did not stop. When the afternoon faded, he reached a stretch of calmer water. The sea smoothed, the wind eased, the clouds thinned. Haldor rested for a moment and pulled his cloak tighter. He ate a barley cake and drank more water. His breath slowed. His heart settled. He heard a sound behind him. He turned and saw a small shape in the water. A seal surfaced near the longship. It watched him with dark, round eyes. It dipped under the water and rose again. Haldor watched it in silence. Animals often crossed paths with travelers. He felt no fear. The seal drifted for a time and then swam away. Haldor kept rowing until he saw a thin line of land in the distance. The shore looked long and flat. Smoke rose from one small point. He felt his breath catch. He wondered if the dream pointed toward this place. He rowed closer. A few huts stood on the shore. A small wooden dock reached into the water. A man stood at the edge holding a spear. Haldor raised his hand. The man raised his in return. Haldor rowed toward him. When he reached the dock, Haldor stepped onto the planks. The man greeted him and asked where he traveled from. Haldor gave the name of his village. The man said travelers pass through sometimes. He asked what brought Haldor across the sea. Haldor said he followed a dream. The man nodded. He said his own father once crossed the water after a dream of his sister. He said people listened when dreams brought fear. Haldor asked if the shore looked like the one in his dream. The man said he should walk inland and see if the land called to him. He said the cliffs behind the huts stretched far. Haldor thanked him. Haldor carried his supplies and walked up the path. The air felt still. Snow rested on each wooden roof. Smoke drifted from small chimneys. A few children played near a fence. They paused and watched him pass. Haldor reached a rise that looked over the coastline. He felt the dream rise inside him again. He remembered the trees behind his daughter's figure. He remembered the shape of the rocks. He scanned the land and saw a line of cliffs farther east. He felt a pull toward them. He walked for a long time along the rocky path. Snow fell from branches. The sea roared far below. He placed each step with care. He climbed a small ridge and found a view of a long stretch of shore. His breath caught. The shore looked like the one from his dream. The same curve in the land. The same large stones near the water. He walked down toward the beach. His boots slipped on the slope. He steadied himself with one hand on the ground. When he reached the sand, he stepped toward the rocks. The same cold wind from the dream touched his face. He stood still and listened. He heard nothing. He looked at the water. He felt the same heaviness from the dream. His daughter's silent face returned to him. He clenched his hand. He sank to one knee. He touched the sand. He closed his eyes. He waited for the next piece of the dream to rise. Halldor stayed on one knee at the edge of the shore. Cold wind touched his face. Snow drifted across the sand in thin lines. He opened his eyes. He looked at the curve of the beach. He looked at the stones from his dream. The sea looked calm for the moment. The silence pressed on him. He waited for the next sign. He waited for the dream to guide him further. His breath moved slow. His hands rested on his thighs. The feeling in his chest did not ease. He rose to his feet. He stepped closer to the large stone near the water. He placed his hand against it. The surface felt rough and cold. He remembered the dream again. His daughter stood near a rock like this. Her hand reached toward him. He looked around. No people walked this part of the coast. Only wind and snow moved. He walked along the line of stones. Each one held a different shape. He bent down at one and brushed snow away. Sand stuck to his fingers. He stood again. He walked until the stones ended and the beach stretched into a narrow strip. Beyond it stood a slope covered with thin trees. Their branches swayed with the wind. Halldor stepped toward the slope. His boots sank into the snow. He climbed until he reached a line of trees. He stood between them and listened. A faint sound drifted from farther inland. It did not sound like wind. It sounded like movement. He gripped his father's knife and moved toward the sound with slow, steady steps. He walked through the trees until he reached a small clearing. Snow covered the ground. A single hut stood near a large boulder. Smoke drifted from a hole in the roof. A man stepped out carrying an axe. The man saw Halldor and stopped. He asked who stood in front of him. Halldor gave his name. He said he came from across the sea. He said he followed a dream. The man lowered his axe. He asked what dream led him across the water in winter. Halldor said he saw his daughter on a shore he did not know. He said her voice held no sound. He said he feared danger reached toward her. The man listened with full attention. He said people in his family trusted dreams like this. He said many travelers reach them with fear in their hearts. He invited Halldor inside the hut. Halldor followed. The air inside felt warm. A fire burned in a small pit. A woman sat near the flames. She looked at Halldor with calm eyes. The man introduced her as his sister, Thora. She nodded to Halldor. She asked if he wanted warm water. He thanked her and sat on a fur mat. The man placed the axe near the wall. He sat across from Halldor. He said his name was Bjorn. He asked Halldor if the dream pointed to the shore outside. Halldor said the stones matched the dream. He said the curve of the beach felt the same. Bjorn asked if he saw any other signs in the dream. Halldor shook his head. He said the dream showed only his daughter in silence. Thora handed him a cup of warm water mixed with herbs. He drank in slow sips. The heat spread through his chest. She asked how old his daughter was. Halldor said, "She reached 9 winters." Thora asked if the dream showed her older or younger. Halldor said she looked older. Thora and Bjorn exchanged a look. Bjorn asked if Halldor believed the dream pointed to the future. Halldor said he feared it did. Bjorn stood and threw a small log into the fire. Sparks rose. He sat again and asked Halldor more questions. He asked if Halldor ever traveled far from his home. Halldor said he traveled along the coast many times, but never far into open sea. Bjorn asked if he trusted the dream more than the fear inside him. Halldor said he trusted both. Thora leaned forward. She said the land east of the cliffs held people and traders. She said danger reached that coast many times each winter. She said raiders passed through when the sea stayed calm. She asked if Halldor felt the dream pointed toward danger from people instead of weather. Halldor said he did not know. She said dreams often warned parents of people more than storms. Bjorn stood again. He said he wanted to show Halldor something. He stepped outside. Halldor followed him. Thora stayed inside, tending the fire. Bjorn walked along the path behind the hut. Snow rested in thick patches under the trees. They reached a ridge overlooking a wide stretch of land. Smoke drifted in thin lines far to the east. Bjorn pointed toward the smoke. He said a group settled there for the winter. He said they traded with fishermen. He said some brought trouble. He said some brought peace. He said he did not trust them. Halldor watched the smoke. He felt something press on his chest again. Bjorn asked if the scene matched any part of his dream. Halldor said no. The dream showed only the shore. Bjorn nodded. He said sometimes dreams pointed to unseen trouble instead of visible signs. They walked back to the hut. Thora stirred a pot of grain over the fire. She asked if Halldor planned to stay the night or return to his boat. He said he wanted to stay near the shore until the dream gave him direction. Bjorn said he could sleep in their hut. He said the storm from the north might return soon. Halldor accepted the offer. Thora served warm grain in wooden bowls. They ate in silence for a moment. The heat soothed Halldor's throat. Bjorn asked if Halldor wanted to walk the beach at night. Halldor said he did. Bjorn said he would join him. After the meal, they stepped outside. Snow fell in stronger lines. The wind shook the branches. They walked along the path leading to the rocky beach. Halldor stopped near a stone he recognized from the dream. Bjorn watched him with steady eyes. Halldor breathed slow. He looked at the sea. Waves rolled toward the shore with heavy sound. Snow hit the water and melted on contact. He looked at the sky. Clouds drifted in thick layers. Bjorn asked him what he felt. Halldor said he felt the same pull he felt in the dream. Bjorn said he wanted to show him something farther along the beach. They walked until they reached a point where large cliffs rose above them. A hollow formed in the rock. Bjorn stepped inside. Halldor followed. Snow did not reach the ground here. The hollow held stillness. Bjorn pointed to marks carved in the rock. The marks showed lines and circles. Some showed shapes of boats. Some showed shapes of people standing on a shore. Bjorn said his father carved the marks after a dream many years earlier. He said his father dreamed of a child calling for him from a distant shore. He said he traveled across the sea and found the place from his dream. He said the child in the dream turned out to be a boy he saved from raiders. He said dreams guided him. Halldor ran his hand across the carvings. He felt the grooves under his fingers. Bjorn said many travelers followed dreams across the sea. He said dreams held truth for families. He said parents sensed danger before it reached their children. Halldor nodded. He felt the truth in the hollow. They stepped out into the wind again. Snow hit their cloaks. They walked back toward the hut. The sky darkened. The sea roared louder. Thora lit more firewood inside the hut. The warm light filled the room. Halldor sat near the fire. He held his hands over the heat. Thora asked if he felt closer to the next step. He said he felt the dream stir again. Bjorn said the next morning might hold more signs. He said Halldor should rest. Halldor lay on a fur mat near the fire. The heat felt steady. Thora placed a small blanket over him. Bjorn checked the door latch and sat beside the fire. The room filled with crackling sound. Halldor closed his eyes. He drifted into uneasy sleep. In the dream, he saw the same shore. Snow fell in thin lines. His daughter stood near the stone again. This time her hand pointed toward the cliffs. Her face held fear. Her mouth moved, but made no sound. Halldor stepped toward her. He tried to speak. The waves behind her grew taller. She turned her head for a moment, as if she heard something behind her. Halldor woke with sharp breath. The fire still burned. The hut stayed warm. Bjorn looked at him. Thora sat near the far wall grinding herbs. Bjorn asked him what he saw. Halldor said the dream returned. He said his daughter pointed toward the cliffs. Bjorn said they would walk the cliffs at sunrise. The light outside the hut grew slow and gray. Snow settled on the roof. Wind brushed against the door. Thora handed Halldor warm water. He drank. The heat spread through him. He felt strength rise. Bjorn opened the door. Cold air rushed inside. The sky showed pale light. The sea looked restless. Halldor placed his father's knife at his belt. He stepped outside with Bjorn. Thora stayed behind to tend the fire. They walked toward the cliffs. Their boots sank deep into the snow. Halldor kept his eyes on the rocks above. He felt the dream guide each step. Bjorn said few people climbed these cliffs in winter. He said the wind shaped danger near the edges. Halldor said he did not fear the climb. Bjorn nodded. They reached the base of the cliffs. Halldor placed his hand on the rock. The surface felt cold and rough. He looked up. A narrow path wound along the side. He climbed with steady steps. Bjorn climbed behind him. Snow fell from the branches. The sea roared far below. Halfway up, Halldor stopped. He saw a faint mark on the rock. He brushed snow away. A small carving showed a shape of a boat. Bjorn leaned beside him and looked closer. He said the mark looked old. He said someone carved it long before them. Halldor moved higher. The wind picked up. Snow hid his face. He reached a ledge that overlooked the wide stretch of land. The shoreline curved below. The stones from his dream rested near the water. He stepped closer to the edge. He saw footprints in the snow near the lower path. They looked fresh. He pointed them out to Bjorn. Bjorn squinted and stepped near the ledge. He said the prints belonged to 2 or 3 people. He said they walked inland. Halldor followed the line of prints with his eyes. They led toward a cluster of trees not far from the shoreline. Halldor felt his chest tighten. He remembered his daughter turning her head in the dream. He asked Bjorn who lived near the trees. Bjorn said people from the eastern settlement sometimes walked there. He said some looked for places to settle. Some looked for trade. Some looked for trouble. Halldor stepped back from the ledge. He felt his breath sharpen. Bjorn placed a hand on his shoulder. He said they would follow the prince. Halldor nodded. They climbed down the cliff with care. Snow shifted under their feet. When they reached the ground, Halldor moved toward the trees. Bjorn followed with steady steps. The wind eased for a moment. Snow drifted in soft lines. Halldor reached the first tree and touched the bark. The prince continued toward the deeper forest. He stepped forward again. Halldor stepped between the trees with slow, careful steps. The forest held a stillness that felt tense. Snow rested on each branch. His breath rose in thin clouds. Bjorn walked behind him. The prince in the snow stayed clear. They curved deeper into the woods. Halldor kept his hand near his knife. The dream pushed in the back of his mind. His daughter's silent face stayed with him. He felt the same pull guide his feet. They crossed a small rise. The snow grew thinner under the trees. A stream cut through the ground ahead. Ice formed along the edges. Water moved under the thin layer with a soft sound. Halldor knelt beside the stream and placed his hand on the ground. The prince crossed the ice. They led toward a dense patch of trees on the other side. Bjorn crouched beside him. He touched one of the prints and rubbed the snow between his fingers. He said the tracks appeared fresh. He said the group did not pass long before them. Halldor nodded. He wiped his hand on his cloak. The wind brushed his face. Snow fell in soft flakes now. They stepped across the ice. The ground rose again. They climbed until they reached a ridge that overlooked a small valley. In the valley stood a large stone. Snow covered half its surface. A wooden post leaned against it. Next to the post sat a small cloth bundle. Halldor stopped. The sight felt strange. Bjorn stepped beside him and watched silently. Halldor walked down the slope and approached the stone. He knelt beside the bundle and picked it up. The cloth felt rough and cold. He opened it. Inside lay a few dried berries, a small carved bead, and a piece of charred wood. Bjorn asked if the bead looked familiar. Halldor shook his head. He said the items made no sense to him. Bjorn said they looked like offerings. He said people placed such things near stones when they sought protection or guidance. Halldor placed the items back in the cloth and set it on the ground. He looked at the stone again. Carvings marked the surface. They looked old and shallow. He brushed snow away. He saw the shape of a small boat, a figure standing on a shore, and a line pointing toward the east. He felt his heart beat stronger. Bjorn leaned closer. He traced the line with his finger. He said the carvings looked older than his father's work. He said they held meaning for a group that lived here long before them. Halldor stared at the carvings. He felt the dream sit in his chest. He stood again and faced toward the east. The prince continued in that direction. Halldor and Bjorn followed them. The forest stretched long and quiet. The wind shook branches overhead. Snow fell in bursts. Halldor felt time move slow in the stillness. They walked until the trees opened into a wider clearing. At the far edge of the clearing stood a cluster of simple huts. Smoke rose from one chimney. Bjorn raised his hand and signaled Halldor to stop. Halldor froze. Bjorn listened. Voices drifted from the huts. They sounded low and tense. Bjorn whispered that the voices did not belong to people from his settlement. Halldor crouched behind a fallen tree. Bjorn moved beside him. Two men stepped out of the nearest hut. They wore fur cloaks and carried long knives. They spoke to each other in short, sharp tones. Halldor watched their movements. They looked restless. One man kicked snow off his boots. The other pointed toward the forest. They walked back inside the hut. Bjorn whispered that these men came from the eastern coast. He said they did not trade often. He said they passed through villages looking for supplies when winter pressed hard. Halldor listened. His heart beat harder now. Another man stepped out of a hut farther left. He carried a spear. He stopped and looked toward the forest. Halldor stayed still. Snow fell around them. The man scanned the tree line for a moment, then returned inside. Bjorn whispered that something troubled them. Halldor asked what he meant. Bjorn said men from that coast walked with alertness only when danger followed them. Halldor looked at the ground. The prints in the clearing belonged to these men. Bjorn motioned for Halldor to pull back. They moved behind the trees with slow steps. When they reached a safe distance, Bjorn told Halldor they should not approach the huts yet. He said they should watch from above. He led Halldor along a slope that wrapped behind the clearing. They climbed until they reached a high ridge that looked over the huts. Snow thickened at this height. Halldor brushed flakes from his face. He knelt and watched the settlement below. Smoke rose steady. Shadows moved behind the thin windows. Halldor asked Bjorn if he knew what these men wanted. Bjorn said he did not. He said they came through the coast sometimes. He said people did not trust them. He said they searched for food and tools. He said they watched children closely in villages they passed. Halldor felt a cold wave move through his chest. Bjorn placed a hand on Halldor's shoulder. He said the dream pointed toward danger. He said the danger might come from these men. Halldor looked at the huts again. He felt the dream tighten inside him. His daughter's silent face returned in his mind. Her hand reached for him again. Halldor asked Bjorn if these men took people. Bjorn hesitated. He said some stories told of missing children and missing travelers when these men passed. He said no one knew the truth. He said fear followed them. Halldor felt heat rise in his chest. He said he wanted to get closer. Bjorn said they should wait for night. He said the men stayed restless now. He said darkness would quiet them. Halldor agreed. They waited on the ridge. Snow fell in slow waves. The sky darkened. The sea roared far behind the cliffs. Halldor's breath moved steady, but heavy. His mind stayed on the dream. He pictured his daughter on the shore. He pictured her hand pointing toward danger. He felt each moment press inside him. When the sky turned dark, Bjorn signaled him to move. They climbed down the ridge and approached the clearing from the far side. They stayed behind the trees. They listened. The voices inside the huts softened. Faint light shone through the windows. Bjorn crept toward one of the huts. Halldor followed behind him. They stopped a few steps from the wall. They heard low murmurs from inside. Bjorn pressed his ear against the wood. He listened. He pulled back and whispered. He said the men spoke about a girl. Halldor felt his chest twist. He asked what they said. Bjorn said they spoke about a girl from a distant coast. He said they saw her run into the forest when they passed a village. He said they looked for her. Halldor felt ice grip his throat. He pressed his hand against the hut's wall. He listened. The words inside rose and fell. He did not know the voices. He did not know the girl they spoke about. He felt fear mixed with confusion. He stepped back. Bjorn said the girl might not be his daughter. He said Halldor should not assume. Halldor nodded, but his breath stayed tight. He said the dream pointed toward danger. He said danger might reach his daughter if he failed to understand the dream. They stepped back from the hut and returned to the trees. Bjorn said they should wait for dawn. He said they needed to see the men clearly. Halldor agreed. They walked to a small rise near the shore and built a small shelter of branches. They placed furs on the ground. The wind grew stronger. Snow shook the branches above. They sat under the shelter. Bjorn handed Halldor a piece of dried fish. Halldor ate it in slow bites. The salt sharpened his thoughts. Bjorn drank warm water from a horn. He passed it to Halldor. Halldor took a small sip. He handed it back. The heat steadied him. Bjorn asked if Halldor wanted to speak more about the dream. Halldor said the dream felt clear in shape, but silent in meaning. He said the silence troubled him. Bjorn said silence in a dream often pointed toward danger from another person. He said storms screamed in dreams, but danger from people stayed quiet. Halldor stared toward the dark beach. Snow filled the air. He asked Bjorn if he thought the girl in the dream showed him a warning for all children, not only his. Bjorn said dreams held many layers. He said the dream pointed Halldor here for a reason. He said the reason would show itself soon. Halldor rested his back against the shelter wall. His thoughts stayed sharp. He closed his eyes and tried to summon the dream again. He saw the shore. He saw the stone. His daughter stood alone. She turned her head as if hearing footsteps behind her. He opened his eyes again. His breath moved faster now. Bjorn placed a hand on his shoulder and told him to rest. Halldor tried to sleep. Snow fell outside. The sounds softened. The fire inside the huts faded into silence. Darkness covered the coast. Halldor drifted into shallow sleep. He dreamed again, the same shore, the same silence. His daughter pointed toward the trees this time. She stepped back. A shadow moved behind her. She looked at Halldor with fear. Her mouth formed words he could not hear. The waves grew louder. The shadow stepped closer. Halldor woke with a tight breath. The forest stayed dark. The wind carried thin snow. Bjorn looked at him. Halldor said the dream changed. He said the shadow moved closer to the girl. Bjorn said the dream pushed him forward. He said they would follow the prince at sunrise. The sky turned pale. The snow eased. Bjorn stood. Halldor rose beside him. They stepped from the shelter and walked toward the clearing once more. The huts remained still. Smoke no longer rose. Bjorn held his spear tight. Halldor gripped his father's knife. They moved around the clearing and followed the prince again. The men from the huts walked toward the deeper forest at dawn. Halldor and Bjorn followed the tracks with steady steps. Snow crunched under their boots. The prince led toward the same cluster of trees Halldor saw in the dream. Halldor stopped. The dream's image returned. His daughter pointed toward these trees. He stepped forward. Halldor stepped toward the cluster of trees. His breath moved in short, steady pulls. Snow covered the ground in smooth patches. The prince in front of him stayed clear. Bjorn walked close behind him with his spear angled forward. The trees stood tight together. Their branches made a dark wall that blocked part of the morning light. Halldor felt the same pull he felt in each dream. His daughter pointed toward this place. He knew this with quiet certainty. He stepped through the first line of trees. The air changed once they entered. The wind softened. The world fell quiet. Snow barely reached the ground here. It drifted down in light dust that clung to their cloaks. Halldor kept his hand near his knife. Bjorn held his spear in a firm grip. They walked between trunks that stood tall and thin. Halldor listened for any voice or movement. He heard only their slow steps on the frozen ground. The prince moved in a straight line, deeper into the woods. Halldor crouched once and touched the edges of one. It held the shape of a heavy boot. Snow pushed inward as if the person hurried. Bjorn knelt beside him, and said the prince belonged to 2 or 3 men. He said their steps looked uneven. Halldor nodded and rose again. They followed the tracks until the trees thinned. Ahead lay a low rise with a large boulder resting at its center. Snow slid off the top of the boulder in a single smooth sheet. Halldor stepped closer. He ran his fingers across the surface. The rock felt cold and damp. He walked around it and found more carvings. They looked old. The shapes showed a man on a boat facing inland. A small figure stood on a shore with an arm raised. A line pointed toward the same direction the prince continued. Bjorn stood beside him and examined the carvings. He said dreams often led people to carved stones. He said these stones held memory from older families. Halldor placed his hand on one of the carved lines. He closed his eyes for a moment. He remembered the dream again. His daughter turned her head. The shadow moved closer. He opened his eyes and stepped forward. They followed the prince again. The ground sloped downward. The smell of smoke reached them faintly. Halldor stiffened. Bjorn raised his spear. They moved with slower steps. Snow fell heavier now. The air cooled. Halldor saw a faint glow through the trees. The glow flickered. They reached the edge of another clearing. A small fire burned near an old stump. 2 men sat near it. Halldor recognized one from the huts. The man held a knife across his knees. The other man sharpened a blade against a stone. Their voices rose in short, low bursts. Halldor crouched behind a fallen log. Bjorn crouched beside him. The men spoke about tracks they followed. One said they saw signs of a girl near the cliffs 2 days earlier. The other said she ran into the woods. Halldor felt his chest tighten. Bjorn placed a hand on his arm and whispered that they needed to listen before acting. Halldor nodded but kept his eyes fixed on the 2 men. One man stirred the fire with a stick. He said they searched all day and found no trace of her. The other said she might have reached a village. He said they should move again soon. Halldor watched their faces. He saw tension there. He wondered if these men meant harm or if they chased someone in fear. The man with the knife lifted his head and scanned the trees. Halldor froze. The man narrowed his eyes. He stepped closer to the edge of the clearing. Bjorn pressed his hand against Halldor's shoulder. Halldor did not move. Snow drifted between them. The man looked for another breath and then stepped back. He sat down near the fire again. Bjorn whispered that these men acted on fear, not strength. He said their voices shook when they spoke of the girl. Halldor asked if he thought they hunted her. Bjorn said he did not know. He said they might search for her because she ran from danger. Halldor thought about the dream again. He thought about his daughter on the shore. He felt the same pressure inside his chest. They waited behind the log until the men stood and stamped the snow off their boots. One man threw snow over the fire to kill the flame. They gathered their gear and stepped deeper into the woods. Their voices faded. Halldor and Bjorn followed at a distance. Snow fell heavier now. Thick flakes covered their cloaks. Halldor breathed through the cold air. Bjorn moved with steady steps. They followed the men through the trees until they reached a narrow trail. The trail wound between 2 ridges. Halldor recognized the shape of the ridge from the dream. The same curve behind his daughter. The same height. He felt his pulse rise. The 2 men moved faster now. They stepped over rocks and ducked under low branches. Bjorn pointed at the side of the trail. Fresh marks pressed into the snow. The girl they spoke about passed here earlier. Halldor crouched and touched one. It looked small, lighter than theirs. He stepped forward with quicker pace. Bjorn followed him. The trail rose. The wind found them again at this height. Snow stung their faces. The two men moved farther ahead. Halldor kept them in sight until they reached a small ridge that overlooked a wide valley. He saw the men stop near a fallen tree. They bent down. They lifted something from the ground. Halldor moved closer. The men held a small cloth in their hands. One lifted it. Snow fell off the fabric. Halldor saw the same cloth bundle he found earlier near the stone. He felt a knot tighten inside him. The men talked in low, strained voices. Bjorn whispered that they found the same bundle. Halldor stepped forward 2 paces before Bjorn caught his arm. Bjorn shook his head. He said they needed to wait for the next move. Halldor watched the men carry the cloth bundle. They turned and walked down the other side of the ridge. Halldor and Bjorn followed them with careful steps. Snow slid under their boots. Halldor moved with tense breath. His thoughts stayed sharp. They reached another clearing. Small cave opened at the base of a large rock. The 2 men stood near the entrance. One called inside. No voice answered. The other stepped forward and looked into the cave. Halldor crouched behind a line of bushes. Bjorn crouched beside him. The man who looked inside shook his head. He said she was not there. The other said they needed to check the lower path. They placed the cloth on a rock and walked away. When the men disappeared behind the trees, Halldor stepped out from hiding. Bjorn followed. Halldor walked toward the cave. He felt his breath tighten. The dream pushed in his chest. Bjorn held his spear ready. Halldor stepped inside the cave. Snow did not reach the ground here. The space stayed dim. He saw small footprints pressed into the dirt. His throat tightened. He looked deeper inside. He saw a piece of cloth caught on a rock. He picked it up. It felt thin and worn. Bjorn examined it and said it belonged to a child. Halldor stepped back outside. He scanned the ground. The small prints led out of the cave and down a narrow slope. He crouched and touched the edges. He felt the faint warmth of movement not long before. He rose again. Bjorn asked if he thought the girl in the dream reached this place. Halldor said the dream guided him toward this direction. He said he did not know if the girl in the dream matched the one the men followed. Bjorn nodded. He said dreams often mixed fear and truth. They followed the small prints down the slope. Snow fell harder now. The wind pulled at their cloaks. Halldor narrowed his eyes against the snow. The trail wound through thick brush. The footprints moved in uneven steps. The child who made them ran at times and walked slow at others. They reached a point where the track split. One path curved toward thick bushes. The other followed a narrow stream. Halldor crouched. Bjorn knelt beside him. They studied the tracks. Bjorn said one path showed heavier steps, as if the child fell and stood again. Halldor said the dream showed his daughter turning her head. He said she looked toward a place like this. He pointed toward the path near the stream. Bjorn trusted him. They followed the stream path. The water moved under thin ice. The prince stayed close to the edge. Halldor paused once and looked around. He saw a broken branch. He saw a small mark on the bark. He reached out and touched it. The mark felt fresh. They followed the stream until the land opened. A small rise stood ahead. At the top, a single tree leaned sideways from wind. Snow gathered under it. Halldor climbed the rise with quick steps. He reached the top and looked around. He saw another clearing below. A small structure made of wood and branches stood at the edge. Smoke rose from the center. Halldor felt his breath freeze for a moment. Bjorn climbed beside him. He looked down and said the hut looked abandoned for many seasons. Halldor shook his head. He said someone tended the fire inside. They walked down toward the hut. The wind eased. The snow fell in lighter flakes. Halldor felt his pulse rise as they reached the door. The structure leaned on one side. The roof sagged. A thin drift of smoke reached the sky. Halldor stepped forward and pushed the door. It creaked. He entered the dim room. His breath slowed. His eyes adjusted. He saw furs near the wall. He saw a wooden bowl placed near the fire. He saw a small figure curled near the embers. A girl, her hair tangled, her cloak torn. Her hands gripped a small carved bead. Halldor froze. The girl lifted her head. Her eyes widened. Halldor did not move. The girl sat frozen near the embers. Her eyes stayed fixed on him. Snow drifted through the open doorway behind him. The fire inside the hut burned low. Smoke curled upward in thin lines. Bjorn stepped in behind Halldor and lowered his spear. The girl pulled her knees closer to her chest. Her hands gripped the carved bead so tight her knuckles turned pale. Halldor crouched slowly. He kept both hands open. He spoke in a steady voice. He asked if she was hurt. She said nothing. Her breath moved fast. Her lips trembled from cold or fear. Halldor saw dried tears on her face. He did not move closer. He let her watch him. Bjorn stepped to the side of the hut, far enough to give space. Halldor asked her name. She pressed her cheek against her knees. No sound came. He waited. He spoke again. He told her he crossed the sea after a dream. He told her the dream showed a girl alone on a shore. He said he wanted to find the one who needed help. Her eyes softened. She lifted her head and stared at him longer now. Bjorn stepped near the fire and added a small log. Sparks rose. Warmth spread through the hut. The girl loosened her grip on the carved bead. She looked at the fire, then at Halldor. She whispered a name. Her voice shook. She said her name was Sifa. Halldor repeated the name with calm tone. She nodded once. Halldor asked if she hurt anywhere. She shook her head. He asked if she came from the eastern coast. She nodded. Bjorn glanced at Halldor. Sifa said she ran from her village. Her voice cracked. She said men came through and argued with her mother. She said the men pointed at her. She said her mother told her to hide and run. She said she left before nightfall and kept moving. Halldor's chest tightened. He asked if the men followed her. She nodded again. Her breath broke. She said she heard them behind her. She said she hid in the cave. She said she hid under roots. She said she walked without stopping. She said she reached this hut before her legs failed. She reached toward the fire with one small hand. Halldor asked if her mother still lived. Sifa lowered her head. She said she did not know. Bjorn leaned forward and asked how long she walked. Sifa said she walked for 2 days. She held the carved bead in her palm. She said her mother gave it to her before she ran. She pressed it against her chest. Halldor reached into his cloak and pulled out a strip of dried fish. He placed it on the floor between them. He said she could take it if she wanted. She crawled forward and picked it up. She ate in small, slow bites. Bjorn stepped outside and returned with a small skin of water. He handed it to her. She drank with shaking hands. Halldor asked if the men hurt her. She shook her head. She said they chased her. She said they called out for her to stop. She said she hid from them every time they passed near. She said she heard their voices again this morning. She said she crawled into the hut to escape the wind. Bjorn asked if she saw anyone else. She said she saw no one. Halldor asked if she saw his daughter. She looked confused. He shook his head. He said, "Never mind." Bjorn watched him with careful eyes. Halldor asked Sifa if the men looked like the ones they saw near the huts. She nodded. Bjorn exhaled slow. Halldor said the men looked restless. He said they searched for her. She pulled her cloak around herself. Her breathing steadied now. Halldor stood and walked toward the doorway. Snow covered the trees. The wind moved more gentle now. He turned back toward Sifa. Her face looked drained. She shivered. Halldor reached for a fur near the wall and placed it closer to her. She pulled it around her shoulders. Bjorn said they should not stay in the hut long. He said the men might return to this area. He said they needed to move before dusk. Halldor nodded. He told Sifa they would protect her. She looked at him with wide eyes. She asked if they would take her back to her mother. Halldor said they would find her or bring her somewhere safe. Sifa said she feared the men. Halldor said he feared them too. He said fear did not stop people in his village. He said fear taught them what needed doing. She nodded with slow movement. Bjorn stepped outside to check the tracks. Halldor helped Sifa stand. She leaned against the wall for a moment. Her legs shook. He gave her a barley cake from his pouch. She ate half and tucked the rest inside her cloak. Bjorn returned. He said the prints from the men moved deeper into the forest. He said they likely searched farther north now. He said this gave them time. Halldor lifted Sifa into his arms. She weighed little. She held the carved bead tight. They stepped into the snow again. The hut faded behind them. Snow covered their tracks as they moved. Bjorn walked ahead and cleared branches with his spear. Halldor followed behind. Sifa rested her head against his chest. Her breath hitched from cold. Halldor moved with careful steps. They reached the rise near the stream. Halldor set Sifa down for a moment. She walked with small, slow steps. Bjorn kneeled and checked the ground. The prints from the men followed another path. The snow covered part of the trail. Bjorn pointed in the opposite direction. He said they should reach the beach again before nightfall. Halldor agreed. They walked for a long time. Sifa held on to Halldor's cloak. She said the forest scared her. He said the forest scared him too sometimes. She pressed closer to him. When they reached the ridge near the cliffs, Sifa stopped. She looked down toward the shore. She pointed. Halldor followed her gaze. He saw the same stones from his dream. He felt the same pressure in his chest. He asked why she pointed. She said she felt something there. She said the shore reminded her of the night she left home. She said she saw a girl stand there once when she hid behind a rock. Halldor's breath froze. He crouched to her level. He asked her how long ago she saw the girl. She said 3 nights earlier. He asked if she knew the girl. She shook her head. She said the girl looked lost. She said the girl disappeared before Sifa reached her. She said the girl did not speak. Halldor stared at her. His mind raced. His dream returned. His daughter stood on a shore, making no sound. He looked toward the sea. Snow drifted over the stones. He rose again. Bjorn asked what he thought. Halldor said the dream might show a warning, not a message from his daughter. He said the dream might show danger for any child. Bjorn said dreams often mixed people together. He said dreams showed fear in symbols. Halldor breathed slow. They descended the ridge and reached the shoreline. Waves touched the sand with steady rhythm. The wind came from the west now. Sifa stayed close to Halldor. She looked out across the sea. Bjorn said they needed to reach his settlement soon. He said Thora would keep Sifa warm. He said they must leave before the men reached this part of the coast. Halldor nodded. He lifted Sifa onto his back. She held his shoulders. They walked along the beach. Snow fell lighter now. The cliffs stood high behind them. The sea roared once. Halldor kept moving. He felt the dream's pull fade. He felt a new weight rise, the weight of Sifa's fear, the weight of the men who followed her. They reached the trail leading toward Bjorn's hut. The trees parted. Smoke rose from the roof. Thora stepped outside with a cloak wrapped around her shoulders. She saw Sifa and reached for her. Sifa slid off Halldor's back and ran into Thora's arms. Thora led her inside. Bjorn and Halldor followed. The fire burned strong. Thora wrapped Sifa in thick furs. Sifa lay near the fire and held her carved bead. Thora gave her warm broth. The girl drank in slow sips. Bjorn sat across from Halldor. He asked what Halldor planned to do next. Halldor said the dream brought him here for a reason. He said he would protect Sifa. Bjorn said they might need to confront the men. Halldor agreed. Thora asked if Halldor believed the dream pointed toward this girl instead of his daughter. Halldor said he did not know. He said dreams held layers. He said he trusted the path in front of him. Thora nodded. The fire warmed the hut. Sifa rested with heavy eyes. Bjorn sharpened his spear. Thora prepared more broth. Halldor sat near the fire and looked at the carved bead in Sifa's hand. He wondered about her mother. He wondered about the men who chased her. He wondered if the dream still held more to show. When night covered the land again, snow eased. The wind dropped. Sifa slept. Bjorn checked the door latch. Thora added more wood to the fire. Halldor lay on a fur mat. He stared at the ceiling and waited for sleep. He drifted. The dream returned. The shore again. His daughter again. Her hand again. But this time she stood beside another child, a smaller one, their faces blurred. The sea behind them roared. The shadow stepped closer. Both children pointed toward the trees. Halldor woke with a sharp breath. The fire still burned. Sifa slept near the wall. Bjorn and Thora rested with slow breaths. Halldor stood and stepped outside. Snow glowed under pale moonlight. The sea stretched wide. The dream pressed in his chest again. He looked toward the trees. He knew the danger moved closer. Halldor stayed outside in the cold for a long moment. Snow drifted across the ground. The moon hung low and pale. The sea moved in slow waves. His breath showed in steady clouds. The dream still pressed on him. Two children stood beside each other. Both pointed toward the trees. The shadow moved closer. The dream held more warning than before. He felt it settle deep inside him. He stepped back into the hut. Bjorn stirred. Thora opened her eyes. Sifa slept, curled near the fire. Halldor said danger moved closer. Bjorn stood and grabbed his spear. Thora added wood to the fire. Bjorn asked what the dream showed. Halldor told him. Bjorn listened without a word. He nodded once and said they would prepare. Thora woke Sifa with gentle hands. The girl sat up with wide eyes. She looked at Halldor. She asked if the men came again. Halldor said they might. She tightened her hold on the carved bead. Bjorn told Thora to keep her near the fire. He told Halldor they needed to check the clearing again. They stepped into the cold. Snow covered the trees in heavy lines now. The wind carried a low hum. Halldor walked ahead. Bjorn walked beside him. They moved through the forest with careful steps. Their boots pressed deep prints in the snow. The world felt tight and still. They reached the ridge above the huts the men used earlier. Smoke rose again from one chimney. Bjorn whispered that they stayed nearby. Halldor crouched behind a cluster of low branches. Bjorn crouched beside him. They watched. Two men stepped out from the first hut. One carried a spear, the other held a rope. Their faces looked tense. They argued in short, sharp bursts. Snow blew across their cloaks. They turned toward the forest and pointed. Halldor felt the same pressure in his chest. Bjorn narrowed his eyes. The men walked toward the deeper forest. Halldor and Bjorn followed with distance between them. Snow fell heavier again. The prince stayed clear. The men moved fast. They reached the clearing where Halldor and Bjorn saw the fire earlier. They stopped. They talked in low voices. Halldor stepped closer behind a thick oak. He listened. One man said they saw new tracks in the snow. He said they belonged to more than one person. The other said they should search for the girl again. He said she could not escape far. He kicked the snow in frustration. Bjorn leaned close to Halldor and whispered that the men felt desperate. Halldor nodded. He watched every move they made. The men walked deeper into the forest. Halldor followed them. They reached the rise near the stream. The men stopped. One man bent down and examined the snow. He pointed toward the direction of Bjorn's hut. Halldor felt heat rise in his chest. He looked at Bjorn. Bjorn's jaw tightened. The men started walking toward the hut. Halldor stepped ahead. Bjorn pulled him back. He said they needed to think with clear minds. He said rushing would cause danger for Sifa. Halldor forced his breath steady. He nodded. They moved around the trail and took a higher path that reached the hut before the men. The snow grew thicker. Wind pushed at their cloaks. They climbed the path that curved above the forest. The hut stood below. Smoke still rose. Thora sat inside near the fire. Sifa slept on the furs again. Bjorn and Halldor hurried down the slope. They entered the hut. Thora looked up with alarm. Halldor said the men moved toward the hut. Thora lifted Sifa into her arms. Sifa woke and clung to her. Bjorn pointed to the back of the room. He said they needed to leave through the narrow path behind the hut. They stepped outside. Snow drifted down in thick sheets. The narrow path wound between two ridges. Trees blocked the wind. Halldor led the way. Thora followed with Sifa in her arms. Bjorn walked behind them with his spear ready. They moved through the tight trail. Snow muffled each step. Halldor looked behind them once. He saw nothing but white air. They reached a point where the trail opened into a small hollow. A stream cut through it. Ice cracked along the edges. Halldor crossed first. Thora followed. Sifa clung tight to her cloak. Bjorn crossed last. They climbed a small rise. Halldor looked ahead. He knew the coast lay beyond the ridge. He planned to reach the shore where he landed. He knew the longship waited there. Bjorn said they should reach it before the men reached them. They walked fast now. The forest thinned. Pale light pressed through the branches. They reached the ridge and looked down. The sea stretched wide. Halldor saw the longship on the sand. Snow gathered in the hull. The tide pulled at the edges of the shore. They descended the slope. Halldor lifted Sifa onto his back. Bjorn held his spear tight. Thora kept close to Halldor. The wind from the sea hit their faces. Snow blew sideways. Halldor moved faster. The longship grew closer. They reached the sand. Halldor placed Sifa inside the longship. Bjorn helped Thora climb in. Halldor pushed the longship toward the water. Waves hit the sides. Snow clung to the planks. Then Halldor heard shouting. He turned. Two men broke through the trees. Their cloaks whipped in the wind. One man held a spear. The other held a knife. Their breath came in hard bursts. They shouted again. Sifa shrank down in the longship. Thora held her close. Halldor gripped his father's knife. Bjorn raised his spear. The men stepped onto the sand. One pointed at Sifa. He shouted her name. She hid her face. Bjorn stepped in front of Halldor. He asked the men why they chased a child. The men shouted over each other. One said they tried to stop her from running. He said she ran into danger. He said she belonged with her mother. The other said they followed orders from their leader. He said the leader wanted the girl found. Halldor asked why. The men did not answer at first. Then one said the girl saw something she should not see. He said she fled a fight between their leader and her mother. He said they wanted to bring her back to force her mother to speak. Sifa shook her head, hard. She cried into Thora's cloak. Halldor felt anger rise. He stepped forward. Bjorn grabbed his arm. He said they needed to choose their moment. The men stepped closer. Snow hit their faces. The sea roared behind them. Halldor felt the dream rise again. 2 children, a shadow behind them, danger from people, not storm. He saw it clear. Halldor stepped beside Bjorn. The men shouted again. They moved faster. One lifted his spear. Bjorn pushed Halldor back and met the man first. Their weapons clashed. The sound echoed across the beach. The second man rushed toward the longship. Halldor moved with sharp focus. He blocked the man's strike with his knife. The man pushed hard. Halldor held his ground. Snow blew across their faces. Halldor pushed the man off balance. The man stumbled. Bjorn knocked his opponent down with one strike of his spear shaft. The second man swung again. Halldor blocked and stepped forward. He pushed the man into the sand. The man's knife fell. Halldor kicked it away. The man stared up in fear. Bjorn held his spear at the first man's throat. Snow gathered across their cloaks. The sea pulled at the longship. Thora held Sifa tight. The girl did not speak. Halldor asked the men if more followed them. One shook his head. The other said the leader stayed far behind. He said only they chased Sifa. Bjorn kept his spear steady. Halldor told the men to leave the coast. He said they would protect the girl. The men stood slowly. They backed away toward the trees. Snow hid their shapes as they retreated. When the forest swallowed them, Halldor turned toward the longship. Bjorn checked the beach for more tracks. Thora held Sifa, who still clung to the carved bead. Halldor pushed the longship deeper into the water. Bjorn helped. Thora lifted Sifa into the hull. Halldor climbed in after her. Bjorn followed. The sea rocked the boat. Halldor took the oars. Bjorn steadied the hull. Thora wrapped Sifa in furs. The girl watched the shore fade. Halldor rode through the cold waves. The land shrank behind them. Snow fell softer now. Sifa leaned against Thora. Bjorn watched the horizon. Halldor breathed slow. The dream no longer pressed in his chest. The dream brought him here. The dream warned him. The dream ended now. He rode toward the fjord. The water smoothed. The clouds thinned. He felt the weight lift from his shoulders. Sifa slept in Thora's arms. Bjorn rested one hand on the side of the boat. Halldor watched the sea and kept rowing. Hours passed before the fjord opened before them. Smoke rose from distant roofs. The mountains stood familiar. The wind carried a calmer sound. Halldor felt the weight of the journey settle into memory. When they reached the shore of Bjorn's settlement, people gathered. They saw Sifa and spoke in low voices. They helped pull the longship onto the sand. Thora carried Sifa inside. Bjorn thanked Halldor. His voice held more meaning than the words. Halldor stood on the shore. Snow fell in thin lines. He looked back toward the open sea. He thought about his daughter. He thought about his dream. He thought about the girl he saved. 2 children, a shadow behind them. His dream showed fear, not only his own. He understood now. You reached the end with calm, steady breath. Thank you. The next story will follow a widow who walked alone through winter forest paths to guard her last home. I set a free guide in the next description for you. Rest now. Loosen your shoulders. Slow your breath. Keep warm.